Whatever emerges from the government's new industrial strategy, and whenever it does emerge, there's almost universal agreement that it must, in some way, encourage investment in dynamic, digital technology-driven manufacturing activity at the local level. The goal, to deliver skilled, high-paying jobs in areas that lost skills and jobs in the de-industrialisation of the last few decades. If they want a template for making that happen, they need look no further than CBE Plus, a collection of manufacturing companies brought together and then taken to an entirely new level of productivity. In a moment, we'll be talking to Marie Cooper, one of the people who made that happen, and then to Henri Murison, Chief Executive of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, about how we can make it possible for others to follow the CBE Plus example. Marie Cooper, CBE Plus is fated as a fantastic example of what can happen when dynamic people get together and bring good manufacturing companies together. Why did you decide to go down this route in the first place?
Interesting question, Nick. Not quite sure it was all planned. And I think one of my favourite topics is be careful what you wish for. It was an interesting transition from my previous business. We sold to a American corporate. Not necessarily the culture that suited me or Chris, my original business partner in CBE. So we went looking for businesses that actually had value we could add to and create. And I don't think I ever expected to get what opportunities arose for us. You know, they just sort of came together. They were linked and the synergies. And I just saw the vision of bringing them all together and creating that integrated supply chain opportunity. And it was one customer that inspired me right at the start. And I thought, if that one customer can ask us to do that, you know, there must be others. And it's just escalated from there. Not without its challenges, but it's been a journey.
Well, it's a great story, Marie, and commercially the impact has been fantastic. But what impact has it had on the locality in Chesterfield?
Well, we've actually preserved two historic businesses in the region. We recruit locally wherever we can do. And we've just brought, you know, the region into knowing that manufacturing is still here, you know, and not necessarily in a full manufacturing base. We're quite surrounded by food industry, if I'm honest, so quite different. But, you know, it's added value to the community and we try to get involved as much as we can.
To what extent, given that the recent troubles we've had in the UK have demonstrated that post de-industrialisation, there have been an awful lot of people without skilled jobs to go to and without getting the kind of skills, even if those jobs were there. To what extent do you believe CBE Plus is something of a role model for what can happen to re-energise communities?
It's about showcasing what we actually do. And modern manufacturing is very different for perceptions. You know, people have ideas of what industry actually used to look like and not what does look like. So we've opened our doors to communities. We've got the councils involved. You know, so what does modern manufacturing look like today and how does that inspire the future? You know, bringing in the younger generations to actually say, you know, I want to be an engineer. I want to work in manufacturing. What does that actually look like and what careers are available for them now? So it's perception changing.
I think that if I'm to be totally fair, the companies that you brought together to make CBE Plus were very good companies in their day, but perhaps had, you know, outlived their heydays. I'm trying to be polite here. To what extent also is this replicable across regions right around the UK? I mean, yes, you've done it in Chesterfield. Yes, I'm sure it's happening elsewhere. But this is something that we should be shouting about, encouraging others to do.
Absolutely. And I think the more of us that are role models, you know, it's just inspiring the owners of these businesses to actually want to do it. It's about wanting to do it and what impact that actually has, you know, and unless we can showcase case studies that the impact has actually been, we've got an apprenticeship program that is going to take us into the future. And, you know, I want to know who's going to be running this business in 20 years' time. And if we're not training and developing these people, you know, what's going to happen? I want to know that this business will succeed. So, you know, it's all about creating that energy and drive around skills, and not just for us, because, if we can create a pool of people that as businesses we can all tap into, because things change, technologies evolve and skills evolve. And so long as we're all in that mindset that it is forward thinking and it's not a fix for today or even tomorrow, it's a fix for next year, it's a fix for 5 years, it's a fix for 10 years. We're working on that model to create sustainability.
Let's talk about the nuts and bolts of the investment that created CBE Plus. Was it all your own money? Did you have to borrow? Did you get help from any external agencies, government funds, for instance?
I've had a bit of everything, quite frankly. A lot of my own money and investment. The business has been through challenges that it's found difficult to get high street funding, shall we say. Governments say they like to help, but then when it actually comes down to it, I think the term pushing water uphill has actually been used a couple of times recently. So when businesses actually need it, it's not necessarily easy to, obtain or move forward. So it's been a combination, but it's been a big investment. It's been a big risk. But for me, it's all about what it can deliver going forward.
Well, let's go back. We were talking about CB Plus being a model for re-energizing localities around the country. To what extent, if you were sitting down with Johnny Reynolds, the business secretary, would you say to him and to Rachel Reeves, listen, guys, there's going to be a massive ROI if you get behind this as part of industrial strategy?
That's exactly the point. I sit in a lot of meetings, part of Make UK, Made in Midlands, Midlands Aerospace, all these networks that, are actually saying to us that there isn't enough UK supply chain to deliver what they need going forward. And then we're a business, and I know there's a lot of other businesses the same. We're sat here with capacity running at 60%, so we can almost double our turnover in a fantastic facility that potentially nobody knows anything about. So how do we get to know what is in the UK first, and then how do we scale that up so we can support the OEMs and we can support the manufacturing journey? It's a difficult one as to how to get that message out there. And then actually, how can that feed back in? We can react. We've got capacity. We could, administer tomorrow. So what businesses need our capabilities? And then how do we impact by getting into those supply chains by them knowing we're here?
I mean, it is actually blindingly obvious. I mean, supply chains are contracting globally, uncertainty geopolitically, et cetera, et cetera. There's also the need post-Brexit to bring a lot of the supply chains home. You're sitting pretty, and there should be more like you to be able to provide the service and the parts and the contract work that the OEMs are looking for.
And that's it. And, I've spent a lot of time over the last 6 months doing this myself, sitting in front of OEMs and saying, actually, look, we're here, and this is what we're doing. And, even the MRC, Matt at Sheffield, he'd heard of the things that we'd done. And he said, I've heard about you bringing all these businesses together. He says, but, to quote him, he actually said, I didn't realise the impact of what you've actually created. And this is here, and this is something new. So this is not just an amalgamation of 6 businesses. This is actually creating something quite unique for UK manufacturing that's, scaled up all the capabilities in the businesses I've bought. So, what you just said about taking them to a different level. Yes, the managers of the previous business had got them to a level that they felt capable of. New energy, new drives, new investment. We've escalated and took the business to a totally different level. But then how do we shout about it? How does people know it's here? And, and I know there's so many other businesses like us out there. I'm not on my own. And that's nice to know as well.
Well, of course. And I imagine, Marie, that were anybody to pick up the phone and say, Marie, I need some advice on how to do this, you'd be happy to help them?
Oh, of course. A lot of my support and energy and drive came from people who had been there and done it. And I always say, let them make the mistakes and, why not take the advice of people who have been there? It's costly to do it yourself and timely. And I'm an impatient person. So, if I can do something quicker, I will.
Henri Murison, we've just heard a great story about dynamic entrepreneurship, breathing new life and investment into manufacturing companies, into a community, creating significant advanced manufacturing capacity in the economy and the process. Now, would you agree that it shows there's quite a bit of pent-up, untapped potential out there in the UK at the moment?
I think there are lots of opportunities, and clearly if you think about the supply chains in many of our parts of the north of England, including, for example, in West Yorkshire, the landscape isn't dominated by OEMs, by prime businesses. In the manufacturing world, it's dominated by smaller and medium-sized companies. And there's huge opportunities there to think about how we can grow the productivity of those businesses. And certainly through some of my work with the Productivity Institute and more widely, we need to look at both firm level productivity. So that's what's happening within individual businesses, but then those factors that affect productivity across the piece. And obviously talking to manufacturers across, particularly the corridor of the Pennines up in the northeast, connectivity, the ability to deliver for just-in-time supply chains. There are some of those barriers which we need to address, as well as putting in place some of the wider drivers which will enable individual firms to perform better.
Yeah, your chairman, George Osborne, it was 2011 or so when he was Chancellor, he set in motion the wheels that ultimately led to the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, I beg your pardon. He declared it was time for the March of the Makers. Now, what are your priorities in helping the makers of the North thrive and prosper?
I think over the period I've been involved with the organisation, and whilst George was Chancellor, now obviously our current chair, Jim O'Neill, very much continuing that same view, which is that there are four prime capabilities in the North. One of them is manufacturing and advanced materials. And whether it be recently with work that's been done looking at how you could advance the opportunities for advanced materials in the North by colleagues at Metro Dynamics, whether it's thinking about the particular elements of the manufacturing supply chain that we could intervene in. So that's through innovation, through opportunities in the challenges of net zero, whether that be in producing new components for wind turbines, whether that be small modular reactors. I think you can start to see how some of those major transitions in our economy, as well as things that can change the weather in our environments in terms of our ecosystems, these are how we can support manufacturing to reach its potential. And previous interventions like Made Smarter Review, led by our former colleague Jürgen Meyer, now leading GB Energy, very strong example of how from within the business community, and we are a business-led organisation, absolutely you can bring forward initiatives that are going to have huge benefits for firms, particularly for those small and medium-sized businesses, which employ the vast majority of people who work in manufacturing in this country.
And infrastructure is so important, isn't it? I know that this is HS2 up in the air and so on. I mean, and the Trans-Pennine connectivity, all that infrastructure, if it improves, it will make life better for the supply chains that manufacturers depend on.
And absolutely, on that corridor of the M6, for example, between the Midlands and the northwest of England, the loss of HS2 potentially leads to more congestion on the road network, which doesn't just disadvantage motorists, it disadvantages hauliers, and that disadvantages manufacturers. There also are obviously businesses who are directly tied up in those supply chains. So Hitachi in the northeast of England have their challenges around their order book, but the one thing that is sitting on that order book long term is rolling stock for HS2, which does give that business a secure future, gives their other supply chain partners a secure future if they can get a bridge to that point. And I think my reflection would be that the opportunities for manufacturing in the north of England are huge. And if you take a legitimate view that the north is part of a country that has a strong services element, and there are strong business services in the north of England, knowledge-intensive jobs in cities, generating services are important. But those things only exist in the north of England because of manufacturing, energy, digital, which obviously crosses into manufacturing, and health, which obviously includes health manufacturing, particularly up in the northeast, for instance. So you see the important role of manufacturing, not as the only element of our economy, but as a driver of wider prosperity, which is fundamental if you want to improve productivity in the north of England, because manufacturing will be what helps to drive much of that change that we need to see in our economy.
Yeah, the industrial strategy that the government said it's going to bring out, we're waiting for it. Devolution of decision making is vital in that. I've heard you say this before. I've heard many people say that the more that decision making, particularly around skills, that can be devolved into the regions, means that we're likely to get a much more successful industrial strategy in the long term.
And that's absolutely true. And skills devolution is beginning to show dividends across the north of England in our areas with devolution. I think you can also look at some industrial strategy interventions, the success, for example, of Steve Rotherham having come in alongside the Royce Institute, the MIF, part of Liverpool University, a bit like the AMRC across in South Yorkshire, also showing the role of universities. And I think my instinct would be that our elected mayors, where they've got more opportunities to line up the skill system, the innovation ecosystem, and the manufacturing opportunities, we'll see real success. And I'm really passionate about the work being done by Oliver Coppard in South Yorkshire, having the first investment zone in the country, absolutely with Boeing and their innovation needs at the centre of it, but unlocking huge opportunities for businesses both there in South Yorkshire and across the north of England to capture supply chain opportunities that otherwise they wouldn't get. And I think this is the key point, that to what extent can mayors, working with a powerful and committed central government, can they work in partnership to push forward on industrial strategy to avoid us missing the opportunities to produce more UK content? And that, for me, is the key opportunity. To what extent can mega projects through to exports, to what extent can we ensure in all those domains that we are getting British manufacturers and manufacturers, including here in the north of England, to take available the opportunities that exist?
Yeah, the brilliant story that Marie Cooper told us about CBE Plus demonstrates that private investment is what drove that. And we know that the industrial strategy is very much going to be based on government making much more private investment crowded in, to use the phrase. But she did complain that over the last few years, of course, the Conservatives were in power then, she felt there was a lack of clarity around intention and whatever support there might have been, not necessarily financial out there, for people in her position trying to really breathe new life into manufacturing companies. Would you argue that we do need a sense of clarity and direction from this new industrial strategy?
And I think I'm honest, I'm not sure that many businesses would have been touched by the very well thought through national industrial strategy pieces that Greg Clark did with his time in government. But those local industrial strategies absolutely would have touched many SMEs more directly and more closely, and they were never finished or implemented by central government, although I think many places continue to push on with the agendas they'd outlined. I think when it comes to the Labour Party's commitment to a national wealth fund, to obviously a greater focus and alignment to the work of the National Infrastructure Bank, the British Business Bank, more commonality of purpose. I think if you compare us to other parts of Europe, it's very clear that investment by public-backed institutions plays a bigger role in ecosystems there. I think my thinking in terms of what will come next in the UK context is that whenever if there is any government support available, it needs to absolutely be leveraging greater business support. And I think there are some great examples in venture capital around how for example, our pension schemes, how our larger institutions, how are all coming together in institutions like Gritstone, backing innovative ideas out of our universities. I think we need to see more of that type of change in institution environment. But I think for many of our manufacturers, I think that clearly having a joined up offer, a really clear, supportive offer to those who are taking risk in our economy is absolutely what we need. But much of that will be about providing, whether it be programs like Made Smart or others, that absolutely address their needs rather than simply being generic across the economy. And I do think how central and place-based government joins up to offer a coherent offer to manufacturing, I think is really important. And I know that many of our mayors and their business advisors, for example, Mandy Ridyard, who's run and helped lead Progimax, an important business, growing business in West Yorkshire in Bradford, on the outskirts of Bradford, that supplied Boeing for many years, for example. I know people like Mandy and others will use every lever they can get hold of in the local public sector to support manufacturers. And that's something that I think is in the interests of our economy and in the interests of every entrepreneur that is thinking of expanding or taking risks with manufacturing businesses that they might have any involvement in.
Well, Henri, let's hope that everything comes together in the way you suggest. Thank you so much for being with us.
Really great to speak to you, and thanks so much for the time.
The Production Line is produced by Manufacturing TV. If you'd like to suggest a story for The Production Line, maybe you'd like to be on it, or perhaps your company would like to sponsor the programme, email info@ukmfgmedia.com, info@ukmfgmedia.com, or go to our website ukmfg.tv.